Human design helps you make decisions as yourself. At the core of human design is how do we make decisions? The premise is that we've been making decisions with our mind since we developed our mind in order to strategize, to survive. Roughly 90,000 years ago, humanity developed language. There was a mutation with the dropping of the larynx that changed the way we could vocalize sounds, and now we have language. And as we developed language, we developed a sophisticated thought that allowed us to reflect and to strategize and to come up with ways of making decisions that would optimize our survival. But we have continued to evolve and we've continued to change, and this mental decision making is no longer necessary. In fact, we now have a well-developed bodily intelligence which is able to essentially make decisions without using the mind. And it's a mechanical thing where your body will just naturally act in a certain way. It will naturally behave in a certain way. And so there are all these different types of people that have different kinds of bodily intelligence, and this is what human design is about. Human design is a mystical system. It's a mystical revelation. In some ways, it's an end-time knowledge, which is not to say that we're in the last days, but there have been so many mystical systems throughout history, from astrology to, I Ching to all these various tarot reading and Kabbalah and all these different systems. And human design is kind of our most recent revelation of how these things work together. It's a synthesis, but it's not the work of a person who came up with it by mental effort. It was more like a psychedelic experience. It was an experience that revealed this knowledge. And the idea behind human design is that there are different types that have different forms of bodily intelligence. So now we are essentially in a place where we can trust our bodily intelligence to make decisions. I am a generator. I have a certain kind of bodily intelligence called sacral authority, which means that there's a part of me that is going to respond using sounds, and I can trust these sounds. So you ask me, do you like this? Uh-huh. Do you like that? Uh-uh. Do you want to do this? Uh-huh. I can make these sounds, or I might go, yeah, who has the energy for that? Or, like I'm interested in that. Maybe I do have the energy for that. Do you want to go to the movie? Yeah, that sounds great. That means I don't. That means I don't have the energy for it because my tone of voice, the sounds I'm making, are not correct. There are other types too. There are types that trust their spleen, for instance. The spleen is the center of intuition, is the center of intelligence, where their intuition tells them something, tells them duck or turn left, or they're driving down the freeway and the intuition tells them take this exit. And who knows why, but the spleen is picked up on something in a way. There are people who have all different kinds of authority. They have emotional authority, where they need to gain emotional clarity through a process of going through an emotional wave. Something happens and they have a strong emotional reaction, and they need to wait and not impulsively act until that wave is finished. So there are all these different kinds of strategies, and the main idea from human design is that we've spent so many years collectively, historically, generation after generation after generation, of making decisions mentally, because that was the only way we could survive. And starting a few hundred years ago, very recently, humanity has undergone certain mutations. We're now in a transitional form. Just like we transitioned from the Neanderthal to Homo erectus, or Homo sapiens, 90,000 years ago or so, up to 50,000 years ago. There was a transitional period. Right now, we're in a similar transitional period to a form which no longer needs to rely on mental strategies, on mental decision-making, on goal-oriented, focused, strategic, that kind of thinking. In fact, we can be more receptive, we can be more open to things. We're in this transition to a different way of living, a different way of being. And part of that is towards trusting the form, the body itself, to guide us and to make decisions. And it's a collective deconditioning process from thousands and thousands of years of tribalism, which has conditioned us to behave in certain ways. So it's really about becoming yourself, becoming an individual, becoming who you really are. So none of this is supposed to be limiting. None of this is supposed to be, oh, I'm this type, therefore I'm limited in this and this and this way. I mean, yeah, I guess it might show certain limitations in one sense, but what it's really about is to be able to make decisions as yourself, to be yourself, and to be able to differentiate as yourself, so that ultimately, you're breaking free from anything that would restrict you in certain habitual defense mechanisms and habits and so on. Okay, so to start with, if you look at your chart's called a body graph. And the body graph has 9 centers. And each one of these centers is a different aspect of ourselves. Okay. So looking at your body graph, you'll see there are 9 centers. And in your case, these are all undefined. That means they're open, they're receptive. If you look at the body graphs of different people, you'll see so much variety. Some people have certain centers defined and undefined, and there's what are called activations of the gates. You'll see these numbers all over the body graph. And so each of the 9 centers is an aspect of yourself. And when it's defined, it's going to be colored in the body graph. And this has to do with how the activations work. If you have an activation in a gate in one center and it connects to an activation in a gate in another center, that's called a channel, and that defines the centers. So in your case, they're all undefined. This is a rare configuration. Around 1 in 100 people have all centers undefined. And when all centers are undefined, you're very open. You're open to others. You're open to how you take them in. You're receptive to them. And the real dilemma happens if you identify with these aspects as yourself. For instance, you have an open solar plexus. This is the emotional center. It's the triangle on the right side of the chart. Well, when you have an open solar plexus and you're around somebody who's happy, you're going to be even happier. You're going to take all that in and amplify it, and you'll be happier than them. But then when they're sad, you'll go even lower down in that sadness of that wave. So it's very receptive to others' emotional states. You have, all of your centers are undefined. So your undefined root is going to be very receptive to pressure from others. The root center has to do with adrenaline and how we take in others, and when it's undefined, how we take in their pressures, how they can pressure us to hurry up or be faster, or, the sacral center, when it's undefined, is going to take in others' motivation or impulse or commitment. So if they go, ooh, I really want to do this, well, you might want to do it even more. It's going to be amplifying that. And the spleen is going to amplify others' fears and all of these things. So I'll go through them, one by one, but the overview here is that when you have these open centers, you're going to essentially be amplifying from others. You're going to be taking them in. You're going to be very, the potential is to be very wise about others, about other people, to be very wise about other people's emotional states, about who's in a hurry and who isn't, about, who's afraid and who isn't afraid, all of these things. So when you have all of the centers undefined, it makes you a reflector. Your type is the reflector. And the reflector, again, is only 1% of the population. Some interesting things about reflectors. It's very unique. Each type is unique, but the reflectors have certain things you have to know about how this works. The reflector they have their own process where they actually are going to be changing in a consistent way over the lunar cycle. So as the moon goes through its cycle, you're going to experience all of the colors of your rainbow, so to speak. Some days you're going to have a lot of energy, other days you're going to have no energy. Some days you'll be very emotional, other days you're not going to be as emotional. Some days you're going to want to talk a lot, other days you're not going to have much to say, and so on. So you kind of get to experience this range of ways of being. The way I think about it is that the reflector, if you could take that lunar cycle, that 28-day cycle, and record them over an entire 28 days and then speed it up so you're seeing that person almost like a flip book. You're seeing that whole 28-day cycle encapsulated. That's who they are, that consistency. But who you are at any one particular moment is going to change, right? You might feel really emotional and then the next day not be. And someone might say, well, who is this person really, that they're so changeable? But there is a consistency. There's something that doesn't change there. And what doesn't change is the consistency of that lunar cycle and the consistency of how it goes through systematically activating the different aspects of your body graph. So the reflector has their own strategy, which is to wait 28 days before making a decision. If you're thinking of taking a job, wait 28 days to decide if that job is good or not. If you're, trying to make a decision of a place to move, any big decision in your life, you need 28 days of being in a state of limbo, basically, being in a state of not being sure and not having drawn conclusions. So one of the most difficult things for the reflector, is to stay in that state of uncertainty, that productive state of confusion even, and to not rush to jump to a conclusion. The projector has a signature, the signature of how it feels to be around a reflector who's really living themselves. The reflector who's living themselves is going to have a signature of surprise, where they're continually surprised at life. And the reflector who's not living as themselves, the reflector who's making mental decisions and who is living the not-self, is going to have a different frequency that they put off, and that's going to be disappointment. They're disappointed that they weren't surprised. They're disappointed that things ended up exactly the way they thought they would. This is the dilemma for the reflector. When you jump to conclusions and when you make decisions preemptively without waiting that 28-day lunar cycle, you'll be disappointed. And so much of the reflector's not-self mental strategy is going to be based around avoiding that disappointment and feeling so disappointed. Disappointment at lack of surprise. That's all it is. Disappointment that the surprise never came. Disappointment that things ended up exactly the way you thought they would. Disappointed that you jumped to a conclusion and that conclusion was correct, in the sense that it actually came true in that way. And what happens is, if you can stay in that state of not having a conclusion, of not being sure, and of just waiting it out, then you're surprised. And during this waiting time, you're sampling other people. You're sampling their aura. There's an idea that aura, is a New Age concept, meaning something that the body has, that the body possesses. No, the aura is simply the non-visible part of the body. You are your aura. Everyone is their physical, visible part of the body, and also this thing that you can't see but you can feel. Being in the presence of someone, you feel an aura that comes through them. Even in the tone of voice, you can detect a certain frequency that's, it's a similar thing. So the reflector aura is a sampling aura. It samples other people. It samples their opinions. It samples their ideas. It samples their perspectives. So it's really good for you to actually talk it over and meet with a lot of different people and get all of their different feedback and ideas about decisions in your life. If you're thinking about taking a job, talking to people in your life and putting together what everybody else says so that over that 28 days you're slowly synthesizing your entirety of your experience. So you're essentially going to be sampling and taking in from others, and then you're not trusting any one particular other. You're not trusting anyone else's authority. You're trusting your own synthesis that comes together out of that sampling that you do. Reflectors are highly susceptible to their environment, to their community. So having community is very important for a reflector, whether they realize it or not, that being a part of a community and being, not in the tribal sense, reflectors are not tribal, so it's not a community that keeps you locked in. I mean, maybe it's even multiple communities and the freedom to move between them. But in a way, you're the canary in the coal mine for the health of the community, for the health of the environment, for the health of that milieu that you're a part of. The reflector, it's very, very important that they give themselves enough time to go through all these different ways of being and ways of experiencing the world. It's important that they have enough time sampling other people, but also being alone. In fact, for all types, it's very important to sleep alone. If you sleep in the presence of someone else's aura, you're being conditioned by them. You know, conditioning is so strong. Conditioning means when another person is affecting you, they're impacting you. So someone else is highly emotional, you're being conditioned by their emotional state. Someone else is in a big hurry or pressure, full of adrenaline, and you're being conditioned to hurry up. You know, each of these centers is going to be open to the conditioning from other people. So when they're all open like this, you can imagine how important it is to disconnect. And I've heard from reflectors that they have a special affinity with nature, with animals, and with children. And I think it's because of the purity of the aura. Children often have a much more pure aura. That frequency is very helpful for the reflector. There's some interesting things about reflectors. They're very in demand. You know, I mean, being only 1 in 100, people can pull at you, and they might want you to be there for them, because the reflector is able to be a mirror to other people in the sense that the other person is going to experience certain things about themselves. You know, it's going to be hard for them to keep secrets in a way, or it's going to be hard for them to be fake, because the reflector is going to show them something that, one of the most common things I've heard is that if you spend a long amount of time with a reflector and you have a one-on-one conversation with them, you'll end up crying. The reflector isn't crying, it's the person they're talking to. You know, it's this cathartic thing that it gets the person you're talking to out of themselves, or it gets them to see themselves in a different way. And so it's so crucial to be in this state of openness, not having made a decision. You know, do you want this job? Well, I got to think about it and get back to you. And a month later, if the job is still available, and if you come to clarity about it and you want it, then it's correct for you. And this is the thing, you might think, well, how is this possible? Life moves so fast. Well, this is the dilemma. The reflector is not designed to move quickly in the moment like that. So the correct job for you, they will wait. You'll have a month to think about it. Or maybe the job isn't ready yet, but they say, okay, in a month, there may be this job opening. And so then you have a month to come up with whether you want to be in that or not. There's also no guarantee it'll only take a single lunar cycle. I mean, it typically will take a single lunar cycle, that's the minimum. But if there's no clarity after that lunar cycle, it might take a second or a third or a fourth. It's really about realizing that the reflector is going to be correct when they are able to synthesize all of the different perspectives and ways of feeling and being and experiencing that come through time. So the reflector is here to experience things over time and to be in that state of not having a conclusion. And then they get surprised. And when they come up with that conclusion, they're going to be disappointed. So it's simple, but it's not easy. It's simple in that you just have to wait. You have to wait and allow that clarity to emerge, that synthesis to emerge through sampling different perspectives and, in a way, even journaling how you feel. It's so important for reflectors to journal, to take note of how they feel over time, of how their experience changes over time, and to realize that And on any given day, you're going to be in a certain state of this 28-day cycle. But it's only once that whole cycle is completed that you've fully digested that information, and then you're prepared to make a decision. And you're prepared to make a decision that aligns you correctly with your correct trajectory in life, that brings you to the right places, the right people. Reflectors have an undefined G center. That's the diamond in the middle. The G center gives us direction. It gives us trajectory, which way we're going. And the thing is, when it's undefined, it's so open to being misguided, to being misled by others. And it's so, so important. The two most important things are the people in your life and the physical environment where you are. Those are the two most important things. And they go hand in hand because in the right environment, you're going to meet the right people. And likewise, the right people are going to take you to the right environment. This is the thing, right? You're going to have the right people taking you to the right environment, but if you don't have the right people, it's a vicious cycle. So the most important thing here is to realize you don't have to find where you're supposed to be. You don't have to find the right environment. You don't have to search for it. The searching is the not self. It's the mind saying you have to do something. It's the mind saying you'd better find your right job. You'd better find the right love relationship. The G center is identity, direction, and love. And the mind is going to tell you you have to find these things and it's up to you. But really, the people in your life will find these things for you. They will bring them to you. And so it's about having the right people. What you have to do is practice discernment. So you might have a close friend or a family member or someone you're very close to, and you start to notice the kinds of places they take you. And if they take you to places where you're physically uncomfortable, where you don't feel good, where you feel, ill, or, places where just the frequency is wrong. You just don't feel good in that place. Well, it's sad to say, but that person is not the right person for you. And if you continue to spend time with them, they're going to be conditioning you in an incorrect way, and they're going to be taking you to the wrong places, and you're going to meet more of the wrong people in those wrong places. And those wrong people will take you to more wrong places, and so on and so on. So it's very important to notice how you feel. I mean, this is at all levels. How do you feel in that particular country? How do you feel in that state? How do you feel in that city or that countryside or that particular area? How do you feel in that room? How do you feel in that chair? You should be sitting in the chair that's most comfortable to you. It's very important to notice where you are and aren't comfortable, and to notice who takes you to places where you're comfortable or not. Once you're in those places, you can be sure that the people you meet there will be correct for you, and they will take you to more places that are comfortable for you. But the mind is going to get in the way, because when you're really trying to make decisions following this way of being true to your own process, the mind is going to be getting in the way. And so that's what I want to talk about now, because all of what I've been talking about so far is how to trust who you really are, how to trust your own process of waiting 28 days and of noticing your changes through that time, and of sampling different people's auras and of synthesizing that information together to make a decision. That's all correct for you. But the dilemmas in life, the real suffering in life, come from what is not correct for us. It comes from the not self, the mind, the mental decision making. So when you have 9 open centers, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole, where the mole might jump out of any one of those 9 centers at any point. The mole here being the not-self theme, that the mental defense mechanisms that are going to try to make you continue making decisions with your mind. So I'd like to talk about those not-self themes. At the core of the not-self, the foundational theme is the ego, the heart center. It's the triangle that's kind of off-center, asymmetrical in the body graph. And that heart center, that ego center, it's the foundation of the not-self. It's the highest in the not-self hierarchy. It's the strongest conditioning and the strongest not-self theme. And it's beneath everything else. It's the final layer of the onion, so to speak. It is the strongest, deepest, hardest conditioning. And it's the thing that's going to be at the core. And that core, with the undefined ego, is going to be feeling unworthy, and it's going to be feeling like it has to prove something, like it has to improve itself, like it has to get better. It's going to be craving love, craving admiration, craving respect, validation, approval. It's wanting to prove that it's worthwhile, wanting to prove that it's worthy of life, and wanting to be worthy, feeling unworthy, and wanting to improve itself so that it becomes worthy. Why is everyone being so kind to me? Why do you love me? Why is everyone, and it's funny because it can feel undeserving in both ways. It's very touchy. It can feel undeserving in the sense that I am just a nobody. People are too kind to me. I don't deserve their kindness. But it can also feel people are betraying me and they're mean to me and they don't treat me well. I deserve better than this. So it simultaneously feels like it deserves better, and it's touchy and it's amplifying that ego energy from others. It's not competitive in itself, but it becomes competitive when it's around someone else, and it defines that ego. It's an interesting thing because it can simultaneously be saying, I am a trustworthy person, but also feeling like it can't trust itself. So there's these interesting dilemmas around the ego, but the ego is going to have to do with how you feel about yourself, how do you feel like you're a good person? Do you feel, these are just the core ego issues, and it's also what gets broken in heartbreak. The ego is also called the heart. It's an interesting point here. When you're heartbroken is also a huge wound to the ego. When someone tells you you're wrong or they don't approve of you, here's the 4 worst things you can say to someone with an undefined ego. I don't trust you. You don't have the stamina. You don't have the guts. You don't have the nerve. And the trust can also be about the capacity. Like, you don't have the capacity. These are terrible things to say to someone with an undefined ego because it's going to hurt so much. As long as they're identifying with someone who, I want to improve myself, I want to be trustworthy, I want to be loyal, I want to keep my promises. The ego is the center of willpower, so I want to be able to exert my willpower. Someone with an undefined ego tries to quit smoking, and they try to exert all this willpower, and then they can't. And then they feel like a terrible person. They feel like there's something wrong with them. What's wrong with me that I don't have the willpower to do this? Making New Year's resolutions. What a joke. Undefined ego, you should never make a New Year's resolution. You know why? Because you're making a promise to yourself that you're going to exert willpower to try to improve yourself. Well, guess what? You have nothing to prove. There's nothing to improve. You're designed perfectly the way you are. Perfectly. Perfectly. There's nothing to change. Sure, yeah, you grow, you develop all of these things. You enter into your correct trajectory. You follow your strategy and authority, and you wait 28 days to make an important decision. That's not an improvement. That's just living yourself as you're designed, as you are. That's living who you truly are. It's not making who you are better. It's not making who you are change. It's the only change is that you're actually being yourself. So the undefined ego, this is the core. This is deep below 8 other layers. Each of the other centers is going to have its own theme. They're each going to have their own theme, and other people won't see this. They won't see that ego theme. It's hidden beneath all the rest. They're going to see your undefined throat. The undefined throat is the weakest of the conditioning centers, meaning it has the lowest impact on your decision-making process. That undefined throat just wants to get attention. It wants to be seen. It wants to be heard. It wants people to notice it. It wants to be able to communicate. It's the throat. It wants to talk. It wants to communicate. So people are going to see that. Oh, well, there's, that person wants to get attention. They're trying to get my attention. Either through being auspiciously silent, conspicuously silent, or through being, talking too much, or through anything, through manners of dress or ways of looking, or trying to be different and unique and trying to stand out. That's the throat. There's someone who wants to stand out. They want to be different. They don't want to be one of the crowd. They want to appear different. And that's the throat, but that's not your core motivation. Your core motivation is to prove to yourself that you're worthy, to improve yourself so you become worthy. And you already are. I mean, that's the thing. So you have undefined ego. You have nothing to prove. Are you trying to prove things? Are you trying to prove someone disagrees with you? Do you try to prove them wrong? Are you trying to prove to people how loyal you are? Prove to them how trustworthy you are? Prove to them how warm you are, how much you care. Anything can be proved, can be attempted to be proven. And looking at your particular configuration, you have 3 completely open channels. That 4521 channel is completely open. The 4521 is open, 2551 is open, and 4037 are open. Well, when you have an open channel, you have denial and blame. So here's the theme, not of, wow, I have a problem. Why am I not trustworthy? It's, no, I'm trustworthy. It's everybody else you can't trust. And it gets really twisted because it's like, I don't have a problem trusting people. Everyone else has a problem trusting people. And I'm trustworthy. It's they who aren't trustworthy. You can see how twisted this becomes. You can simultaneously hold the opinion that you're trustworthy and that you don't have a problem trusting others. But they're the ones who aren't trustworthy. They're not loyal. They break their promises. They betray. Never make a promise. Never make a promise. You have undefined ego. You're never supposed to make a promise. The moment you make a promise, you burden yourself. You're burdening your heart. It puts physical stress on the heart. Why do you think heart failure is such a common thing? Well, 65% of humanity has an undefined ego. You're not alone. 65% of the people out there, deep down, are going to have a dilemma around their self-worth. And they're going to be promising, proving, doing everything they can to prove, exerting all this willpower that they don't have. Guess what? You have inconsistent willpower. It's okay. 65% of people have inconsistent access to their willpower. So the most powerful, important thing you can do to really regain that power to be yourself, to the personal empowerment, not power over others, but this personal empowerment to really be yourself, don't make promises. Don't bargain. Oh, I'll do this for you if you do that for me. Don't even say I will if you can help it. You're not here to promise. You're not here to prove things, to improve things. It's like, asking yourself, do I feel like I have something to prove right now? Because I don't. With undefined ego, you don't. You don't have to prove. Some people do. People that have defined ego, yeah, they have to prove. People are going to make them prove things. Life is going to make them prove. They have to exert their willpower because they have it. It's like a natural law. But you can watch. I mean, this is the freedom that comes is realizing you get this tremendous wisdom when you don't identify any longer and you're able to just watch. You're able to just see it working. You're able to see and experience that feeling welling up inside of you. I have to prove this person. I'm trying to prove something to them. I'm trying to convince them. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to sell yourself to them. In fact, gate 26, that's all about selling yourself. Well, you have gate 44 pointing at it. When you have a gate pointing at one that you don't have, oftentimes you feel like something's lacking. You might feel like you're really bad at selling yourself. You might feel like it's the hardest thing for you to get up in front of an audience and, really sell to them. Well, that's okay. You don't have to. You don't have to prove yourself to them. You don't have to prove your value. You don't have to prove how smart you are, what a caring, considerate person you are, how good you are, how loyal you are, how trustworthy you are. You don't have to prove any of that. If they're demanding you prove it, who cares? They're the wrong people. They're the wrong people because the right person is going to appreciate you for who you are without holding you to some impossible standard of trying to keep your promises, having to be loyal, of having to enter into a bargain with them. You're not here to bargain. You're not here to compromise in that way. The next strongest not self-conditioning center is the solar plexus. The solar plexus is the emotional center. And as I said before, it's going to amplify others' emotions. When they're high, you're going to be higher. When they're low, you're going to be lower. But you don't have to. This is only when you don't notice it happening. When you notice it, you're able to watch it happen. You're able to let it flow through you and experience it without identifying with it. The not-self theme of the undefined solar plexus is avoiding confrontation and truth. It's avoiding confrontation and truth because it amplifies the emotions of everyone around it. So it's trying to minimize the potential for an emotional reaction. It's concerned that when the other reacts or has a strong reaction emotionally, that the person with the undefined solar plexus is going to amplify that emotion, is going to feel it so much stronger than the other person. It's very vulnerable. And it builds this mental defense mechanism around not rocking the boat. You can see how these not-self themes can connect. For instance, the not-self theme of the undefined ego, trying to prove yourself, and the not-self theme of the undefined solar plexus, not rock the boat. I'll prove to you how good I am at not confronting you, at not calling you out. I'll prove to you how good I am at turning a blind eye. I'll prove to you how I am able to avoid any painful truths, anything that might cause pain. So this avoiding of truth, it's wanting to avoid letting the other person down, to avoid disappointing them. And ironically, perhaps, in the case of the reflector, it goes something like, I can avoid disappointment myself if I avoid disappointing others, which leads to disappointment. And again, the disappointment for the reflector is about, I came to a conclusion, I made a decision, and what I thought the case was is exactly how it ended up. Basically, the disappointment that nothing changed. The disappointment that there was no surprise. The undefined solar plexus wants to keep people at arm's length. It wants to keep them from seeing the real you because it doesn't think they can handle the real you. This is what's interesting about it compared to the undefined ego. The undefined ego is just about yourself. There may be some denial and blame around other people saying, I don't, for instance, the undefined ego might say, I don't have a problem being trustworthy, other people have a problem being trustworthy. But it's not about them in the same way that the solar plexus is. The solar plexus is actually looking out at other people and giving you information about them. It's an awareness center. So what happens with the not-self when we're making decisions with our mind is that the mind is so busy making decisions, it can't see other people accurately. It distorts. It's like amplification to the point of distortion. So it's going to distort the way it sees other people. And in this distorted view of other people, they can't handle the truth. They can't handle the confrontation. I would add, the same denial and blame themes can compound in here, where it goes, I don't have problems with intimacy. Everyone else has problems with intimacy. I don't have problems showing people the real me. Nobody else shows me the real them. And so on. There are so many fears in the awareness center. There's 3 awareness centers, the spleen, the solar plexus, and the ajna. And they're all full of fear. In the solar plexus we have the fear that if I really open myself up to someone and connect with them, that fate will intervene and pull us apart. That I'll be forced apart by fate. Or we have the fear that if I really open up to that person, that they won't like what they see, that I'll be inadequate in some way. There's the fear of tradition, both the fear of becoming traditional yourself and also the fear of standing up to tradition. There's the fear of silent treatment, or the fear of silence, where if you say the wrong thing, you will be iced out. You won't have any attention or any, and these all tie in. So, someone's going to ignore me and they won't approve of me if I say the wrong thing. Therefore, I should walk on eggshells around them. That's how the mental strategy of the not self, solar plexus when it's undefined, that's how that strategy goes. And again, the point of human design is to trust your true strategy. As a reflector, you're a lunar being. Everyone else is solar. It's a solar world out there. But you're lunar. Your goddess is the moon, you could say, poetically. And being a lunar being, you are tied to the movements of the moon. And when you follow your strategy, which is to wait 28 days, to allow those lunar cycles, when you follow your lunar authority, you're aligned correctly on your trajectory in life, which takes you to the places you need to go. You meet the people you need to meet. You see the things you need to see. So that is the goal of human design. But what's pulling you away from that is the undefined ego saying, but if I make that decision, what will they think of me? Or the undefined solar plexus, which says, I can't let them see that I actually have this other opinion, that I want to do something else. Basically, I can't disappoint them. I can't let them down. Because if I do, I'm going to be disappointed. All of these themes are going to link to trying to avoid disappointment. And the fantasy is, if I prove how worthy I am, if I prove how trustworthy, if I prove what a good person I am, how loyal, if I keep my promises, I can avoid disappointment. If I don't confront them with painful truths, if I keep them at arm's length, I can avoid disappointment. It's the thing about the solar plexus, is keeping everyone else at arm's length because you don't think they can handle the real you. You don't think they can handle the uncensored, unabashed you. Well, this is a distortion, and you'll see people more accurately. I mean, it's a homogenization more than anything. It's seeing everybody as one group. And sure, it's true, some people won't be able to handle you. But some people will. And they're not getting your unfiltered, true, authentic way of being if you're concerned about rocking the boat, if you're concerned about hurting their feelings, about offending them. The undefined centers get covered over with these defense mechanisms. So the undefined ego has no willpower of its own, really, or no consistent willpower. So it's going to get covered over with a strategy that says, I'll prove to you how much willpower I have. The undefined solar plexus doesn't have its own emotional content in the same way, or consistent emotional wave. So it's going to cover over also. And it's typically covered over with a warm way of being. But it's wired cold. With undefined solar plexus, you are wired cold. That means you're designed to be neutral, to be flat, to be calm, to be still. And what might appear, or might even be, unemotional. And yet, the undefined solar plexus is going to be highly emotional when it's taking in and amplifying others' emotional states. In fact, it might even do this more the less they express them. What's interesting, there's a correct way for people who are emotional to express their emotional wave. And that correct way is to express it on its own pace, in its own timing, neither rushing it, nor trying to slow it down, or fight against it, or push it back. What happens is, you have a vast not-self world out there, where you have all these people who are emotionally defined. They're emotional people, and they're on an emotional wave. And their emotional wave makes them feel sad, or it makes them feel bored, or it makes them feel something that they don't like. And instead of allowing that feeling to go out, they just fight it back and they hold it in, and it bottles up inside and calcifies. And pretty soon, they come across emotionally flat. But inside, they have this turmoil. Well, you pick up on that. It feels like choking. It feels like suffocating. In those cases, if that person would just cry, you could breathe a sigh of relief. You would be so relieved that they would have let out that pent-up, built-up, angsty, emotional feeling that they're not expressing. So repressed emotional states in others are felt even stronger by someone with an undefined solar plexus like yourself. On the other hand, of the opposite extreme, there are people who will express their emotional state instantly. These are people who have defined solar plexus, but they're impulsively acting out of the high or the low points of their wave. They're not waiting for clarity. So they're happy and they're just exuberantly expressing that happiness. Or they're sad and they're, expressing that. And in those cases, a very direct, impulsive expression that doesn't come out of a place of clarity, you're also going to amplify that. So it's interesting. It's, the thing that's going to allow you to experience emotions in the most correct way is going to be being around the right people, where they themselves are experiencing their own emotional state in a way that they're neither rushing it nor fighting it back. And they need us. I have undefined solar plexus too. And it's something I've learned is that the people who have it defined need those of us with it undefined to confront them. What they need from us is precisely what we're afraid to do, to tell them the truth. And the truth is, we see what their emotional state is, and we can tell them what their emotional state is, because they don't notice it. They don't really know. They don't realize they're high on the wave and they might not feel that way tomorrow, or they're low on the wave and they might feel better. They feel like the way that they feel at that point in time is going to last forever, or like it's the truth. They feel that they have this truth in that particular moment, and we need to remind them, no. You're exuberant right now, but you're not being yourself. You're not, just give it time. Or, wow, you seem really down about something. And they don't realize they're down. They don't realize it. So, people who have emotional definition need those of us who lack emotional definition to confront them. You also have undefined G center. The G center, as I mentioned before, is the center of direction, of love. It's the center of identity. When you have an undefined G center, as I mentioned, the most important thing for you is place. And in the right place, you're going to meet the right people who take you to more of the right places. So therefore, it's kind of place and people in your life. I guess the two most important things. But I think of place as primary because the G center is about a sense of place and a sense of direction, and having that sense of direction. And the not self theme of the G center is searching for identity, searching for direction, searching for love, always searching and feeling so lost. So this feeling of being lost and not really knowing where to go, not really knowing what's right for you, not really being sure if you're with the right person. These are G-center dilemmas. And the solution to the dilemma is to realize it's supposed to come to you. When you have an undefined center, that is something receptive in you. You receive direction from other people. If they're the correct people, they will give you the right direction. You're not supposed to find where you're supposed to live. You're supposed to have people that you know guide you there and help you find that. So instead of going out and looking at 20 different places to live, you tell people that you know that you're looking, and that they will then come to you and say, come to this place. And you go there, and it feels not so great, then that person doesn't really know you, and they're not going to be one of the people who can take you to the right places in your life. Someone else takes you to a place that feels amazing. Well, this person will always take you to places that feel amazing then. It's just the way it works. So instead of trying to find, instead of searching, instead of looking, where is it, where is it, where is it? You just practice discernment. It's so different. You practice the discernment of really seeing who in your life takes you to the right places. So this is so different. Discernment is so different than searching. And with that not self undefined G center, it all ties together. So it's going to be, I can avoid disappointment as long as I find the right place with the right people who won't call me out and I won't call them out. That's the solar plexus right there. We'll keep each other at a safe distance. They're not going to call me on my stuff. I'm not going to call them on their stuff. We'll just let each other be without confronting each other. And if I can find that right place and those right people who really care about me and admire me and love me and respect me and appreciate me, then I can avoid disappointment. But there's always a sneaking suspicion, and it's not real. There's a sneaking suspicion that disappointment is inevitable. This is the thing that we realize, is that in the deconditioning process, where we're going through these layers and layers of stuff we've learned, been told, experienced, that we're kind of shell-shocked. Collectively as a human race, we're all avoiding whatever that theme is for our particular type. So the generator is going to get really frustrated. Well, they're going to spend their lives trying to avoid frustration. The manifester is going to have problems around anger. They're going to spend their lives avoiding anger. And anger and frustration are different. They're different animals. The projector is going to avoid bitterness. That's its own thing too. Bitterness is not the same as frustration or anger. And you as a reflector have a mind that's organized around avoiding disappointment. If only I find the right place, I'll avoid disappointment. If only I have the right career path, the right trajectory, the right identity, I'll avoid disappointment. You have undefined spleen. This is the theme of holding on to what isn't good for you. Of holding tightly to things that bring you safety, security, that bring you a good feeling, essentially. So with the undefined spleen, there's going to be this theme of clinging, of holding on and refusing to let go. And it's so odd when you see the undefined spleen with the undefined solar plexus together, because the solar plexus is afraid of intimacy. It's afraid of getting too close. It's afraid of revealing itself to the other person. It's afraid if it really shows the other person who it really is, it'll be rejected. Well, that's the ego, but nevertheless, it feels that the other can't handle it. And the spleen wants to keep the other around, wants to keep them close, doesn't want to let go of them, has attachment issues, separation anxiety. It's afraid. It's another awareness center, so fear is so big here. It's afraid of responsibility. It's afraid its life won't have a purpose. It's afraid of what might come in the future. It's afraid of the past catching up with it. It has all of these different fears and more. And all of that fear can be alleviated temporarily when it's around somebody who activates it, who defines it. So just like when you're around somebody who defines your solar plexus, you're going to feel happier than their happiness, or sadder than their sadness. And it's so much more. I mean, the solar plexus is full of music and art and life, and it's so juicy. Food tastes better, music sounds better, colors are brighter when your solar plexus is activated. The spleen feels safe, secure, and a general feeling of well-being, of health. It rules the immune system. And our sense of, like, when we feel crummy, when we have a cold, when we feel sick or not, if we feel run down or ragged, or if we feel energetic and feel good. And so when that spleen is defined, you're going to feel good. And you're not going to want to let go of people who do that for you. So there'll be certain people in your life who make you feel really good to be around. You just get a warm feeling in their presence. And you're going to want to hold on to those people, whether it's good or not. So the thing to realize is that you can let go. You know, the mind is saying, don't let go or you'll be disappointed. Don't let go, hold on, keep them close, but also don't let them see who you really are. And keep looking till you find the right person. You know, that's that G center. Keep looking and you'll find the right person that'll let you hold on tightly to them and won't leave you. And then you can avoid disappointment. That's what the mind says, but it's not true. It's not true. The only way to really avoid disappointment is by living your strategy and authority. You will be surprised if you wait 28 days to make a decision and you notice and journal and see how you go through a process and how, even though at one point in that process you may have something that you know is true, at another point in that process you have a completely different perspective on that. Each of the undefined centers is trying to do the thing that others are supposed to do for it. So the ego is trying to prove itself. It's here to be proven to. Others are supposed to prove to it, not it trying to prove to them. The solar plexus, the undefined solar plexus. You know, as I mentioned, the solar plexus rules over, it, you know, describes those aspects of our life that are full of spice, that we savor, that are full of juiciness. It's sexuality and it's romance and it's affection and all of these things. Well, with the undefined solar plexus, you can go through your life making these promises to others. I'll give you excitement. I'll give you pleasure. I'll give you all these things. Well, they're not yours to give. You're actually here to receive those things. Your whole life, people will be offering you opportunities for pleasure, opportunities for excitement, for adventure, opportunities to be happy. Now, these all have a flip side. They'll also offer you opportunities to be sad. They'll offer you opportunities to be bored. So the solar plexus is about excitement and boredom as well. And these are a polarity. But my point is, people offer these things to you because you're undefined, so you're yin, you're receptive, you're taking them in, and it draws them out of people. So you don't have to go around offering people these things. You know, the spleen might offer other people a consistent sense of well-being or safety. You don't have to offer them safety. They can offer you that. Survival, you know, things like that. The sacral center never knows when enough is enough. The undefined sacral, anyway. The defined sacral has a certain amount of energy, and it uses that energy, and it's exhausted, and the person gets tired and falls asleep. And they recharge that battery. They recharge that energy. It's like starting every day with a full tank of gas. By the end of the night, the gas is empty, and you fall asleep. So for someone who has a defined sacral, if they actually have that sacral energy, it's so important for them to use all of their energy each day, because otherwise they don't sleep very well. But for you, with the undefined sacral, it's important to go to sleep early, to go to sleep on time, to get in bed an hour before you're going to go to sleep, and just relax and wind down. Because you don't have that consistent energy, but you can feel like you do, because again, this is the not self. So the person with the undefined sacral is going to work even more, even harder than the person with the defined sacral, because they're amplifying that energy that they don't have, really. So they're going to stay up later than the person with the defined sacral. They're going to do more. They're going to work harder. And then the root is a pressure center. The root is all about being in a hurry. Be free of that pressure. You have pressure of things you have to do, and you can't relax until your things to do list is over. So you have this intense pressure that you feel that you need to do these things. Well, you combine these and you have someone who's always in a hurry to work harder than everyone else. So you're going to work harder and you're going to work faster. And you're going to do that to prove to them how good you are, to prove you're a good worker. And because you don't want to step on their toes, you don't want to be a nail that stands out so you're the first one to get hit. You know, it's wanting to make sure you don't rock the boat, sweeping things under the rug. So that sacral with that root, the sacral question to ask yourself is, do I know when enough is enough? Is it enough? Do I know when enough is enough? Have I been here long enough? Have I done this long enough? Have I, have I worked hard enough? Have I done enough for the day? And with the root, it's going to be about, am I always in a hurry to be free from pressure? And can I let go of that pressure or notice the pressure, but not identify with it and not feel the need that you have to do something with it, that you have to be free of it, that you can't relax until you get the things done that you need to get done. Because there's always more to do. But with the undefined solar plexus, the undefined root, it's going to feel like it has to get everything done before it can relax. And you combine this with the others, you synthesize it together, and you have, I'm going to prove to you how good I am at getting things done, at working for you. With that solar plexus, if I can prove to you how good I am at working for you, you'll give me pleasure and satisfaction, and you won't get too close to me. You won't, confront me. You won't call me out on my stuff. There's always a little bit of a bargain with the undefined solar plexus. If I do all this for you, your side of the bargain is not to confront me with painful truths about myself. Then we have the throat, as mentioned before, trying to get attention, wanting others to pay attention to it. Doesn't like being ignored. Feels unheard. Feels like nobody's listening to it, like nobody's paying attention. Then we have the undefined ajna, trying to be certain, or pretending to be certain. Ask yourself, am I trying to be certain? Am I pretending to be certain about things I'm not sure about? And finally, the head, the undefined head, which has a theme of trying to be free of pressure as well. But in this case, it is mental pressure. It's the pressure of the mind that is essentially trying to answer questions, trying to be free from doubt, trying to solve the mysteries, trying to be free from confusion. That's what it's trying to do. And it thinks, as long as I think about something really hard, I can be free from that pressure. But does it really matter? That's the question with the undefined head. Am I thinking about things that don't matter? Am I pretending to be certain about things that don't really matter? Am I thinking about things that don't matter as a way of proving to others how good I am at helping them to solve their problems, to answer their questions? So these undefined centers, these areas of our life that bring us so much suffering, that bring so many dilemmas, they also are potentially the source of our greatest wisdom. And this wisdom is not something abstract. It's quite practical. It's wisdom in the sense that you will actually be able to use these centers to see the other so clearly when the centers are no longer amplifying, when they're no longer chiming in to make decisions. The not self-decision-making process with 9 undefined centers is going to go something like this. You have a decision to make, and then you think, it's like 9 different criteria that all fire in a split second. Is this going to give me direction? Is this going to make me feel good? Is this going to give me, is it going to help me improve myself? Or is it going to give me admiration or love or respect? And ultimately, beyond all of these different variants of not self-strategy decision-making, it's going to come around to, is this going to help me avoid disappointment? Can I avoid disappointment if I do this? And so the decision-making is all based around this avoiding disappointment through escapism, through searching, through proving and improving, through working really hard, putting in hard work, through moving faster, speeding around, hurrying up, all these different attempts to avoid disappointment, holding on tightly, not letting go. If only I don't let go, I can avoid disappointment. But these are also our greatest sources of wisdom. That same undefined head, which is thinking about things that don't matter, can also be noticing who is really inspiring or not. That same undefined heart that's making promises as the not self, that's promising to be better, to improve, when it stops doing that, it's able to know who is truly trustworthy or not. That same solar plexus that's emotionally amplifying and going on these emotional waves, when it becomes calm and still, it's able to know the emotional states of others and to know who's putting out a clean frequency, who's putting out a clean emotional wave that feels good to be taken in. That undefined spleen develops the wisdom to see, has the wisdom to see who is healthy and who isn't, who's safe and who's reckless. But it has that wisdom, that capacity for wisdom, only when it's no longer making decisions, only when it's no longer holding on tightly, refusing to let go. So each of these centers has the potential to bring wisdom, and reflectors are potentially the wisest of us, with all 9 centers open. But this is a potential. This is not a guarantee. Because what happens to most people is that they get worn down by the resistance of life. We live in a thick conditioning field, the deepest homogenizing forces you can imagine, of family, of culture, genetic influences, everything that's basically keeping us locked in habitual states of being where we can't mutate, we can't really differentiate, we can't become ourselves as long as we're identifying with these collective homogenizing norms that really aren't us. And the reflector, historically, has been the agent of the program, so to speak. I think of the reflector almost like a cosmic police force. The reflector, because they have all 9 centers undefined, that's potentially, the most not self you can imagine, the 9-headed hydra of the not self. And because reflectors have this, they also have the opposite potential. They have the potential to undergo the most radical transformation and to have the most wisdom because of that openness that allows them to see so clearly when those centers are no longer amplifying and distorting everything that they're taking in and identifying with it. To identify with something is to say, that's me. So when you identify with your emotional state, you're saying, I'm sad. Well, you're amplifying some sadness that someone else was feeling. When you're identifying with the ego, I'm worthy or I'm unworthy. Same thing. You could be amplifying others. You could be amplifying their fears. You could be amplifying their sickness or their health. All these different things that we don't really think about. We don't really notice how profound the impact is of being in the presence of another person. When you're sitting in their aura, they're putting something inside of you. They're putting their aura. It's amazing to think about how much at a physical level we condition each other. But the reflector is a very special, it's a special case. Not often I do readings for reflectors. And it's not often that reflectors, well, I shouldn't say that, but what I was going to say is something like, one reflector getting into human design is worth 100 generators, because the generator is kind of like the worker bee, the slave, the pawn who's just going along, just doing their work. And the reflector has such a different potential. The generator puts out the frequency of life force on the planet. So changing generators is no small thing. We live in a world full of frustration because 70% of the people here are generators. And the generator's not self-theme is frustration. So yeah, there's reflectors out there who are so disappointed, but they make up such a small amount of the population that the frequency of the world is not disappointment. But there sure is a lot of frustration out there. You can feel it. You can feel the frustration just pulsing off of people. And the same with bitterness. Yeah, there's only 1% of reflectors. Only 1% of the population of the world is reflectors. But 70% is generators, and 20% is projectors. And projectors get bitter. They get so bitter. And even if you're a generator, you can have projected channels, which means you have aspects of yourself that are like the projector. In your case, you don't have either of these. You may feel that bitterness, but that's not you. You're picking up on the bitterness of others. You're not the cynical, jaded, bitter person. That's the not self of the projector. They're sour to life. Oh, they have the potential to be sweet, the potential for so much sweetness, the potential for success. But when they don't get it, when they aren't recognized, when they aren't credited, oh, they get bitter. So bitter that they're growing older and their old classmate is making more money than them, is more successful than them, is more popular, is being recognized. Projectors get bitter when they're not recognized. When they're not recognized for their talents, for their skills, for who they really are, for their ability to support, you name it. Everything under the sun you could imagine being recognized for. And of course, a given projector is not going to want to be recognized for all those things. They're going to want to be recognized for something very specific. They're going to want to be recognized for something specific to them that makes them feel irreplaceable, that makes them feel necessary. And when they're not recognized, they get bitter. Just like the generator, they want something that satisfies them. When they don't get that, they get frustrated. So there's a world out there of just this tremendous not self frequency of frustration and bitterness. And yeah, when you get a generator into human design, that's great. You're actually making the world a better place, quote unquote, because if one person stops putting out that frequency of frustration and they actually find satisfaction in their life, well, it affects everyone. I mean, to a degree, it's all relative. It's a drop in the pool. But the reflector is a special case. If you get a reflector into human design, reflectors they're agents of the program, I mean, I'm using the program kind of as a euphemism for the homogenizing forces. Because the projector, they're going to guide people. The generator is going to be guided. But the reflector, they preside over mutation in some way. They preside over change. I like to imagine in the old days, the reflector is the one who pointed out heresy, who pointed out people who were bucking the norms. There's somebody who's mutating. There's somebody who doesn't fit in. And then the king would, have that person executed or something. That the reflector was essentially the agent of maintaining homeostasis, of preventing change. And that now they can actually be the opposite. They can be the ones who know who has the potential to change, who really is on that mutative edge. Because, humanity doesn't change all at once. It's not all mutating all at once. It's not like everybody is constantly undergoing change. At any given time, there's a very, very small amount of people who are actually going through some sort of transformative process. And the reflector can see that. They have a natural talent or a knack for seeing that. It's just that normally they're sensitive to people who are outside of the domain of normalcy as a way of keeping those people from affecting anyone else, from infecting them even with their contagious mutative ideas, because these kind of things do work in a sort of contagion. But I think the reflector has a very special role. They have a special role for the community, both the personal communities that they're a part of, the global, larger community. The reflector is a very, very important type. The generators are out there to work. The projectors are out there to guide them. The manifestors are kind of being put out to pasture. They used to be the ones who led. They were the pharaohs who led the slave generators to build the pyramids. But the manifestors' time is over. So at this point, they're in a very special place where they get to basically experience life without this obligation that the other types have. But the reflector really is in a special place in the hierarchy, being the rarest type and the type most suited for the whole picture, and the type most suited to understand environment, to understand community, to be able to experience the most different people, to sample them, and also not to be deeply affected by them. Both the projectors and the generators are so impacted by the people in their lives, where if the generator is around somebody and that person's in a bad mood, that generator might have an emotional hangover from spending time with that person. It's like they've absorbed it and they won't let it pass through them. But the reflector has what it's described as a Teflon aura. It's basically nothing sticks to it. You're able to sample someone's frequency when you're with that person and notice that frequency. And then when you're away from them, it's gone. But you've learned something from it. You've gotten some information from it. I'd like to wrap up by talking about profile. Profile is a deep subject. I could go into it for an hour or more easily. But I'll keep it to the overview today because I am cognizant of the fact that particularly when talking about the not-self themes, there's a lot to digest. In fact, it took me about a year to digest my not-self themes, and I'm probably still in the process at a deeper level I'm not currently aware of. But I mean about a year of just noticing those themes playing out, just noticing and unpacking all the different myriad ways the not-self ego insidiously finds its way into things, or the not-self solar plexus is so afraid of truth, and so on. But profile is at the surface. Profile is it's your costume. It's how you appear to people. It's how you act with them. It's what roles you play for them. What roles you play to the greater collective. What roles you play in tribal connections, like friends and family and intimate connections. What roles you play as an individual for yourself. So the profile has so much to do with you know, the way we've engaged in our world, how we interact with others. It is us in some sense, but it's also who we are in the same sense that you are like an actor playing a part in a play. You know, the profile is the character in the play in some way. And so it's not meant to be identified with in the same deep way that you might connect to other aspects of what makes you who you are, or your uniqueness. It's somewhat of a generic. But at the same time, in the same way that Hamlet is a generic, well, different actors play Hamlet different ways, and certain actors make it their own. So there's the same challenge with profile. It's like, how do you take this generic thing but really make it your own? Do it in your own way that nobody else has ever done before, and nobody else will ever do since, or in the future. So you're the 1-3. 1-3 is the investigative martyr. So you're an investigator and you're a martyr. These are the words that, the keynotes, if you will, that summarize the processes. Now, there are plenty of other words that could describe these processes, but the investigator and the martyr are ways to think about or envision what these processes are. Now, every profile is made of 2 lines. The lines are from the Chinese I Ching, the hexagram, the 6 lines of the hexagram. So your first line, conscious, and third line, unconscious. So you have a combination of the first line, conscious process of the investigator, which is investigating things. It's introspective. It wants to learn things. It wants to get to the bottom of them. And then you have an unconscious martyr. And the martyr is willing to throw it all away, to burn it to the ground and start over, to sacrifice themselves to raise the alarm that this isn't working. So it's an interesting, it's the foundational profile. It's the very first profile of all the profiles. It's the very first one. And it's an interesting idea from Chinese philosophy, I suppose, that at the beginning, there's not just order. There's the conflict between order and chaos. Because that first line wants order. You better believe it wants order. It's an authoritarian. It wants control. It wants power. Not power over others, but personal empowerment over itself. And it wants to have that order where it's in control, where it's the expert, where it's the master. You know, or it wants to have an authority that it trusts. It's very introspective, so it knows where it's strong and weak. Not everyone does. Not everybody knows their own strengths and weaknesses. Some people think they're strong in something and they're not. They think they're weak in something and they're not. But the first line is so introspective. It's looking at itself and it's asking itself what these things really are, you know. Sure, we're talking about it, but what is it really? Like, let's get to the foundation of it. Let's get to really understand deeply whatever it is that we want to understand. It's very deep. It goes to the foundation, and it doesn't want to act or to bring anything out into the world or do anything until that foundation is complete. In fact, not even really that interested in bringing it out to the world. It just wants to make sure it has that solid foundation. You know, it's intelligent. The first line is the foundation of intelligence, and it's intelligence based on fear of the unknown. And in that fear of the unknown, it says, I'm afraid that if I don't know something, you know, if I don't really know what this is, then bad things are going to happen, and so I better learn it. And then it gets intelligence. So it's like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know, and so it wants to know how things work. It wants to understand the mechanics behind it, so it has a solid foundation. And in fact, this is how it influences people. The first line influences people in areas where it's an authority. So if you're an expert on something, you're able to really get across to other people about that thing. Not that that's your goal. The first line is pretty self-involved. I don't mean self-absorbed in a narcissistic way. I just mean self-involved. It's involved in what it's interested in. And it's sometimes surprised about other people that are noticing it and watching it and seeing in. Because it's not other-focused. It's focused on what it's learning. It's focused on studying. It's focused on going from apprentice to master. It's not, going to do a surface reading. It's going to really go deep. That first line has to go deep. And in order to do that, it has to have a certain amount of order, and it has to have a certain amount of structure. And it appreciates the bonding of weak and strong. So it appreciates when it's weak in something, it can find a strong master to apprentice under. Well, that third line is so at odds. It's an unconscious third line. So the 1-3 is not going to necessarily realize that they have this internal conflict between what they identify with as themselves, the first line process, the learning, the mastery, and the introspection. And they also have this other thing, which is also them, that they might not realize, which is the anarchist, chaotic, that martyr that's ready to burn everything down, that wants to tear down the walls, that wants to cackle with glee when everything goes wrong. The third line is here to make mistakes, plain and simple. That is what it's here to do. It's here to make mistakes. It's not here to find solutions. It's here to find problems. It's here to find what doesn't work. It's not going to be like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, here you go, this works. No, it's just going to stop at, that doesn't work. That is what it's here for. And that's okay. We need someone who is really good at breaking things. We need someone who's really good at finding what's inefficient. The third lines, they're the ones who find out the side effects of the drugs. They're the first ones who have the side effects and tell everybody else, wow, if you take this drug, this is the side effect you get. And with that third line body, you're so resilient. You might not realize how resilient you are. You might feel fragile. The first line has a bit of a inferiority feeling, or feeling like it's not good enough because it's trying so hard. It sees the other being the master, and so it's fundamentally insecure. That's really the word. The first line is fundamentally insecure, and it's trying to be secure. And that attempt to be secure is what gives it so much depth. It's what gives it so much expertise as it develops from the apprentice to the master, as it goes through all the steps towards mastery. Some of the other lines don't go through that process. Really none of the others do. The second line can't be bothered to go through the steps to mastery. The third line certainly can't. So there's part of you, this conscious part of you, that's going through these steps, moving from insecurity to security. Then there's this third line unconscious that's resilient as hell, because it's designed to just bump into things, to just bump into them and to break them, and then to pick itself back up. So that third line process is all about finding what doesn't work. It's about making mistakes. And when it's unconscious, you don't really even realize what's going on there. It just seems like some sort of chaos that's appearing out of nowhere. But it's you. It's part of you that you don't notice. And it's an important part. I tell third lines, it's so important for them to share the outcomes of their mistakes. You're going for a run, you smack into a wall. Yeah, I didn't know that wall was there. Jeez. And you get up, and you pick yourself up and climb over the wall and keep going, because you have that third line resilient body, just going to keep going. And you never tell anybody. The next day, somebody else smacks into that same wall. This is a tragedy. This is a shame. This is the only real problem with making mistakes, if you don't tell people. So I always tell third lines, you're here to make mistakes. It's a trial and error process. You're here to go through an evolutionary process of trial and error. It's like a scientist. All science evolves through a third line process. The third line is also so skeptical. I mean, it's so skeptical and pessimistic. And being an unconscious line, you might not realize, the first line is willing to align itself with an authority, with someone who's an expert. So that first line goes, wow, this person seems like an expert. What can I learn from them? They're strong in this area. I'm weak in this area. Therefore, I will align myself. That first line, it's really humble. It knows its place, and it knows that for the optimal survival of the human species, the weak and the strong have to work together. So it's all about bonding weakness to strength. It doesn't make sense for two masters to work together. You need the master and the apprentice. Well, the third line is going to question everything. So that 1-3 might not realize that while they're learning from their master, they're apprenticing under the master, part of them is so skeptical and pessimistic and thinks this will never work. And this person's full of it. I got to see for myself. So it's very scientific. Scientists see for themselves. Scientists don't trust each other's word for it. So the 1-3, the investigative martyr. There's so much more I could say about it, but the practical thing to realize is being a first line. It's so important for you to have mentors, to have people you learn from, to have teachers, and you yourself to be a teacher in the areas where you are an expert. And it's so important for you to move from that process of insecurity to security. And then having the third line unconscious. You're here to make mistakes. It's okay. You're here to break things. The third line bonding strategy is bonds made and broken. So you're here to end and start and end and start and end and start relationships. And when you only live out that conscious first line process and reject the third line unconscious, you get into trouble. There's so many 1-3s in relationships they can't get out of because that first line gets stuck in the relationship because it wants that stability and it's very humble and it wants to just, really dig into things and find that solid foundation. And that third line is being ignored because the third line craves the exotic. It craves the different. It's drawn to the most different gene pool it can find. And it wants things to be continually living, stopping and starting, breaking and getting back together, all of these things. And in doing that, it's going to make a lot of mistakes. But that's okay, because those mistakes sometimes lead to random evolutions that we couldn't have predicted otherwise. Being a third line, important things happen to you when you just bump into people, sometimes quite physically. Sometimes somebody will literally just walk into you. The third line, they get in accidents. It's one of their things. They make mistakes, they get in accidents. Good thing they're so resilient. All right, I wish you all the best, and I hope you've enjoyed this reading. If you have any questions at all, feel free to get a hold of me. I love talking about this stuff, and I am honored to have introduced you to this mystical, magical system. All the best.